So just to know what we're doing here, we'll be looking at, hopefully you'll be able to describe the purpose and the value of developmental evaluation by the end of this, and understand the 3 phases, and hopefully be able to put some strategies into place for using it for a pilot for those of you who want to use it, and know where to get more information. But it's a big methodology and it's impossible to share it all with you today. So it's more of an introduction. So what is it? So developmental evaluation first was described in 2008 with this orange book by Jamie Gamble. And he described, and it's actually still a really good free resource, actually. You can find it on the internet if you want to look at that. It's very clear. And then Michael Patton brought this book out later. And then the 3rd book was by Michael Patton and Kate McKegg, which is the Exemplars, which is a very good book because it has case studies in it. So it came from the work of Jamie Gamble, Michael Patton, Kate McKegg, and it's evolved over time. And it's really designed to meet complex context and to work together with social innovation. So what's it? Let me find out a bit more. When do we use it? So the definition of developmental evaluation is all about what it's used for. It's defined by its purpose. So if any of you know evaluation much, I don't know how many of you have done evaluation before. Maybe wave at me if you've done evaluation. Yeah, you've done evaluation. Yeah, okay. So mostly what you would have done is what we call summative evaluation or formative evaluation. So let me describe them first. So summative is to prove that something worked. So often you do it at the end of a project or the end of a program. Has anybody done that? Done one at the end, like a questionnaire? Yep, I've got some waves, yeah. So that's one type, one reason for doing it. Second one is formative. So that's to help improve things, maybe halfway through, to make things, to collect data, to tweak, to refine. Has anybody done that? Yeah, I've got some waves, good. So this is a new type, for a new reason, and it's to develop things. So it can start right at the beginning before there is even the idea is formed. And the aim of it is to help build something, Yep, so that is the key thing to understand about developmental evaluation, is it's not formative and it's not summative. How are we going for translation? Let me know if I'm going too fast. Is the translation keeping up okay? You type it in chat if it's not. Okay, so the formal definition is that it's in developmental evaluation, we use what we call evaluative thinking and methods to help social innovators develop solutions. And for that reason, it contributes to the design of whatever it is that you are doing. So it's programs, strategies, services. And it sees evaluators working really close in real time to provide feedback to people who are testing ideas to help actually build something. And when you put social innovation and evaluation together, it's really an effective combination because you have more rigorous testing. So that's what it is. So let me just compare developmental evaluation with traditional evaluation. That's sometimes a good way to understand it. So we've already said that in traditional evaluation, the thing you're evaluating, the project or the program, is already designed. Whereas in developmental evaluation, you're still developing it. So that's a key difference. In traditional evaluation, you're often seen as an outsider an outside external evaluator coming in. Whereas in developmental evaluation, it's a bit like you're part of the team. So you are working closely with the implementers or the innovators. And with traditional evaluation, we develop one plan and then we implement it. That doesn't work in developmental evaluation. We have to have little plans, little for each sprint or each cycle of work. Have to do a little plan and then think about what to do next. So it's in loops. So no big plan. So traditional evaluation supports accountability, whereas developmental evaluation is really serving the innovator, supporting social innovation in real time. So the accountability is a little different in developmental evaluation. It's really about accountability to learn and adapt. It's really worth thinking about this one because this is the most radical. It's not about being accountable to a funder or against a notion of success. It's quite different. It's accountable to make sure we're learning, seeing patterns, and we're using them to take the next step. All good? I'll leave the translators a second. Now, this next slide talks about different contexts in which developmental evaluation is used. And if it's okay with you, I'll describe them 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd like you to think about which one you think you'd use, which context is most similar to the one you are working on. And at the end of this, we will put it in the chat slam and see. Just need to put the number in, yeah? So number 1 is to help design potentially scalable innovation. Some people might talk about service design, where you are starting from scratch and you are developing something new. It doesn't yet exist, and you may be looking for totally new ways of doing something. An example of this, if you want to follow it up, is in Australia, Taxi, who Joni used to work with. They developed a service design called Family by Family, and they spent 6 months sitting with families to understand their issues and designed a program to help families who were at risk of children being taken away. So it's child protection, and they designed something with them, but it was from scratch. So do you get the idea of that one? So that's the first one. And the idea, I guess, is that you can scale that to other places, and it has been scaled now to the UK. If you have an example of that, type it into the chat. Let's see what we've got going on the chat. Yeah, you can type it in Basque, I don't mind. Chat away as I go. Yeah. The second one is a major systems change or cross scale, and this can include labs. So this is where you might have a cross organizational collaboration, across town halls maybe, and you're trying to create change at a systems level. So you're trying to create a broader scale change. You might be trying to disrupt the existing system. And it might actually be multiple innovations that you're looking at. So, and I will talk to you about an example of this in our training, which is, again, it's an example from Australia, which is Our Town, which is an example of working with 6 towns to address mental health and well-being and improve, try to think about how we can live, we can create towns that help us live better lives. That's 10-year journey, lots of different innovations. Are you clear with that one? So DE works really well at this level, and it's been involved all the way through from the very beginning. So they're probably the most two common ones. The third one is where you've got something maybe that you like the look of, and you want to see whether you can adapt it to a new context. So you're building a modified version of something that's already been built. So, and you can scale different things, such as the general principles or some of the key features of it. And there's an example there. I won't go into too many details on that one. The fourth one is sometimes you get programs that are going to continue to iterate and change forever. There's no intention of them ever becoming stable. This is quite common in international development settings, where they set up a sort of, where they call it a facility, and they set up and they fund from year to year, and they plan from year to year, and they constantly innovate. It's a little similar to number one, but within a program structure. So I invite you, and maybe Yoni, you can repeat this, to type in if any of these you think are relevant to you, which ones. You just need to give the number and put it into the chat function.
So we should type the number of the one that is
Jonna is now giving the indication of the chat so that everyone can just write the number of the most similar strategy or context.
Okay. So we have everything. 1 to 4. 3. Okay. So it looks like these examples make sense to you because all of them have been selected. I don't know which is most common. Maybe number 2. 2, 2, 2, 4. Everyone has been mentioned, less number 1. Yeah. So these are the contexts which developmental evaluation is often used. And it is, I guess, conventional evaluation does not work very well in these contexts. In fact, it can stifle innovation. So that's why it's important to use different approach. So developmental evaluation has a set of principles, 8 principles, and these are the basis of the book that I showed you called Developmental Evaluation. So the first thing we've already learned is that it has a developmental purpose. It's to help build something. It's evaluation rigor, which means it's not just reflection. You have to collect data. So it can use any method. It can use quantitative numbers and qualitative stories, and it does involve collecting data. It has what's called a utilization focus, which means that whatever you do, you should be able to use it. It's aimed to be helpful. It's got an innovation niche. It's designed to partner with innovation. It has a complexity perspective, which means, I don't know if you know much about complexity approaches, but one key feature is emergence. Like, we don't know what is going to come out. So we need to look broadly at where change is happening. also involves systems thinking. It's generally done through co-creation. You do it together with others. It's not done by a single expert. And it needs to always provide timely feedback. Yeah. So they're the principles of developmental evaluation. Okay, I thought we might stop at this point and just absorb what we've heard so far. After this exercise, we will go into a more practical session and we'll look at how you do it, how you implement it across 3 phases. But I would like to give you a chance to digest. So Joni, can I hand over to you to explain this exercise?
Yes, thank you, Jess. So I will explain the exercise in Basque.
So in the next 7 minutes, we will split in little groups and we will have the opportunity to reflect on these questions. I have already organized the groups and you will see how you will be working in 4 different groups, and we will have our own 5th group here in the town hall. So we are going to reflect on these 3 questions, and later on we will have the opportunity to share about what we have been talking in our groups. And these are the 3 questions. What does developmental evaluation remind you of? When Jess was talking about developmental evaluation, what came to your mind? Secondly, what have you done before that might be like this? And thirdly, what are the questions that come up? There could be doubts, or there could be some doubts related to the content that has been explained to. We will have the opportunity to clear all doubts in the groups. And as I said, we will be working for 7 minutes approximately. We have a document that I will share with you on the chat, and there we can write the information. It's a Miro document, as you can see on the chat, and we have different patterns and we have different documents for each of the groups, and in these templates we can write down what we have answered, a way of doing. But when does it come to an end? When can we say that we have finished with our evaluation process?
Great questions, and great to hear that you have been trying it. So in the developmental evaluation, we'll talk about how you can start and get going, and also how to release out of it and what happens afterwards. And with a good innovation, it's what I like to see is that you bake in measurement and evaluation so that you continue to do that. Excuse me. Continue to do that through implementing the initiative, so that we actually build the skills to monitor, as you could say, ongoing as things are implemented. And that's really a new phase. It's not developmental, it's more ongoing monitoring and evaluation. So I think absolutely we need to learn how to do that. It never stops, really. Maybe while I'm sneezing, we'll have the next group.
The spokesperson for the second group. So we have also seen the need to carry out this kind of evaluation, and we understood that it is very important to have certain evaluation phases, stages. And regarding the second question, we have linked it with participative evaluation and with systemic research action. And there were some people in the group who had had a previous experience with developmental evaluation. So that was very interesting to hear. And we were talking about how very often accountability is a very important part of this kind of processes, innovative processes, and how we can integrate accountability in the developmental evaluation. And for us, it was very surprising to see how the first question that arose was, how can we do this? How can we do this? And that was what we have been speaking about in a very brief manner.
Fantastic. Great to hear that you've used similar things, and participatory evaluation and action research, of course, are very, connected to this approach. In terms of accountability, when you're doing co-design, developmental evaluation can provide a very important role. What it can do is record the process, I guess, record what's happened, and also you can evaluate how well you are adhering to things like principles. I will talk about that later in a case study, but there is ways of weaving accountability into it. And in Australia, when I do this work, funders often say that they find
Sorry,
that,
yes, I think the interpretation stopped.
oh,
Can you hear the interpretation? Entzun dezakezue itzulpena, euskeraz saioa jarraitzen ari zaretenak, bai? Bai, ados. You can continue, yes, they can hear. Maybe the problem is here, so continue, please.
they funders have said to me that they like developmental evaluation with social innovation because the evaluation de-risks the innovation, provides more transparency about what's happening, keeps people safer in the co-design process, and they really like it. So there you go. So there's definitely a role. Yeah. So let's go to the next group.
Then. Okay. So we've been speaking about 3 different points of view. I come from the university, so that was my viewpoint, but we have been talking about how design thinking and similar methodologies are very well known for us, how we are also used to other metrics to measure the progress in projects, how we are very well known with this kind of methodologies. Regarding developmental evaluation, for us, it was very necessary because when we are creating a result, we are not only interested in seeing the result itself, but the process, so that we can see which strengths it has, we can see the weaknesses it has, and we have also been reflecting on how it is important to be aware that sometimes we can be very focused on the process, and that doesn't allow us to give a step back and evaluate how things are going. So we would be very interested in knowing how we can approach developmental evaluation in a systematic point of view, how we can systematize that in our processes.
Sounds like you've done a fair bit of this sort of work, and hopefully in the next session I'll talk through a little bit that might help you think about systematizing it. So I'll leave that one and come back to it because that's what we'll be talking about next. Let's go to the next group. The final group, is it? 5. Okay.
In our group, we understood that developmental evaluation was something very new for us. Maria and some other colleagues have been already working with conscious evaluation, and they could find certain similarities. And in fact, this process is a process that is used to to help in the learning process. And it was overall something new for us. And we would like to know how we can carry out the process. What is the process of setting up something new and how we can evaluate it with this approach? And on the other hand, we're also wondering about the roles and dedication. What is the time that we need to dedicate in these processes?
Excellent questions. And I'm going to park them too, because I think we get onto that. I think you're all interested in how to do it. And that's what the next session is. So that's great to hear. Let's go to the final group.
Good morning. We are here in Oñati Council, and some of the ideas that have been mentioned here too. Yes, it's true that we want to know, and it's difficult for us to know how to evaluate something that doesn't exist yet. And on the other hand, in different programs that we have established and in different sessions, we don't have the same name for the evaluation, but yes, we have approaches to evaluate where we evaluate different steps and we set different improvements, and we try to use different types of evaluation in different departments. On the other hand, they say that they have a continuous evaluation. That's the name they put on that. And there are some questions like, for example, which are the resources needed and dedication needed to implement this kind of tool, this evaluation, and if this evaluation is an internal one or an external one, and on the third hand, if we were wondering how can we use it in practice. We have the theory, but how can we use it in our work, everyday work? Thank you.
Excellent questions again. How do you evaluate something that does not yet exist? I think that's the question, isn't it? So I'll just tell you now, one thing is that developmental evaluation can be done by somebody in the team, but you need to nominate them. So they clearly need to know that that's their role. Sometimes it's done by an external person, often with one foot in and one foot out. You can't do it purely externally. So sometimes my team do it like for 1 day or 2 days a week, sort of like a bit embedded, but they do other things as well. That works quite well. But it is quite time consuming, but it can be an internal role. I think this is a good segue into the next session, where we'll start to look at how it works. Sounds like you've got lots of questions about that. Go to the next part. So what does it look like in practice? Now you're all really keen to know. So I'm going to describe it in 3 phases. So the first phase is sort of setting up, is preparing the ground. And the second phase is incubate and grow. It's the middle. And the final is harvest and reseed. And I guess it's important to understand that it does go in cycles. So it's not really linear. I am going to describe these 3 phases, but sometimes you get to the incubate phase and you need to go back to prepare because things change. And then sometimes you get to the end and then you start at the beginning again. So it's not necessarily linear, but it does help to understand the 3 phases. So I'll describe it that way. So the 3 phases, I'm going to give you firstly a quick overview of the 3 phases and what they look like, but I will go into more detail about each phase. So there's a lot of detail here. I'm just going to give you a quick overview, let's say, for each one. I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview. The first phase is preparation, and it does take time to do this start. So we've got a bit of an on-ramp. So, and I've described it in terms of the adaptive work to be done and the technical work to be done. So we often think about evaluation as a technical thing. That's like collecting data, doing theory of change or logic. But there is also work to do that's more about how we show up, how we build relationships, which is really important. So the adaptive work is you need to have a certain degree of trust and relationships to do this work, because you're going to be looking at things that don't work and do work, and you're going to have a lot of uncertainty. And so you need to sort of build what we call a container, where it's okay to talk about what's not working, what is working. And you have to sort of set up how is the developmental evaluator going to work with the other teams. You have to set that up. And also in this early phase, it can be really good to have some what I call anchors, like a boat has an anchor, anchors to keep you steady in the waters when the wind gets high. And these anchors that I like to use, and I'll share an example of this later, is a set of principles. So we develop a set of principles, careful, co-design them usually, and a small number. 4 is ideal. We all agree to them, and then we evaluate against them constantly. Even when there's no design is not formed, there's no theory of change, we evaluate against the principles. That is a really useful and important starting point. At the same time, you can start to build a basic theory of change about trying to understand what it is you're trying to do, what the boundaries are, what your ideas are. So that can happen too, but I would start with the principles. So this is the early stage. And sometimes you have a contract or a partnership agreement in this phase, which is actually quite hard to develop a contract for if you're getting an external person in, because they're not like normal contracts. They can't really be milestone based. They need to be more on time, probably. So yeah, and you can have the beginning of what I call an umbrella evaluation framework, which is very loose, just like the areas of inquiry that we want. So this is the starting phase. So that you need to set up the trust, get some of the anchors in place, a little bit of theory of change, and that can take, that can take a few months to set up, depending on how big the thing you're doing is. Once you've got this set up, you can move into the middle phase, where you start to do more developmental evaluation work. And here, rather than having a big plan and implementing it, it's better to have small plans. And normally in social innovation, you'll have sprints anyway. Yeah. So wrapping plans around the sprints or phases of work, like maybe every 3 months, you might have a plan for what you'll do and then revisit it. And the key thing here is that the evaluator dives in to work with the live issues or the learning moments, and helps. The thing I try and say is I try and when you're doing social innovation, you get wrapped up in the doing, the busyness. So the idea is to get up onto the balcony and help see the patterns. So that's the role that happens. So the sort of outputs from this might be a refined theory of change. You might have learning briefs. Sometimes we write little micro reports, 2 pages long, on key learning issues. You can do process evaluation at this stage, but generally do it as a slide pack, not a report, to keep it fresh and quick and rapid feedback. And then you might, if you do get to the point of testing an idea that starts to build into something more formed, you could do a little mini evaluation of that thing. So that's the middle phase. The end phase, the release phase, is to think about what's coming next. So it might be that you finish the design and that you're thinking about how do we bake monitoring into the new design. You might want a final report. You might want to have a final reflection with everybody. So that's the final phase. Or it might be that you decide you need a new cycle and you go back to the beginning. So I'm going to move on fairly quickly from this. I just want you to understand the 3 phases, I will provide a case study and talk about what we actually did at each phase, but I wanted to give you the overview first. Feel free to add questions into the chat function. I will pick them up at the end. Okay, so there are 4 roles that I often use in developmental evaluation. You can do them all at once, but sometimes it helps to think about each role, and maybe a task for you, and we can do this in a chat slam, is to think about which of these you think you need to know more about, you need to get better at. Yeah. Which one do you need to get better at? Okay, so let's go through each of them. So the first one I call critical friend. And this is a role that I think is really appreciated by the social innovators that I work with. Oh, sorry, we've got to critical friend. There you go. So the idea is that you're encouraging and supportive. So you're a critical friend, not a critical enemy. A critical friend. So you always provide feedback to help achieve the outcomes, honest and candid feedback at certain points. And there are some tools for this. You can use the principles that I mentioned and bringing people back to them, saying, how are we going on that principle? Have we forgotten our principle? What about this? You can use a technique called strategic questioning. You can use pattern spotting template for this as well. These tools are all available. We'll come back to them. So that's the first one, critical friend, which is a very important role for a developmental evaluator. So and then the next one is scientist. This is a little bit more like a traditional evaluator role, but it is important to know that you do need to collect data in part of the developmental evaluation role. So this might be also doing evaluation planning. So for this role is understanding how to develop evaluation questions and develop measures and decide how to measure things and choose the right methods. You have to work pretty fast in this role as a evaluator. I call it rigor on the run. Rigor on the run. So you won't have time to do a randomized control trial or have control groups normally. Instead, we often use triangulation. Triangulation is looking at the data from 3 different points or 3 different perspectives. That can add rigor on the run. So that's the role of the scientist. The next one is the facilitator. Often you are asked to hold space for reflection and learning. And I think a lot of you would know this from things like participatory evaluation and co-design as well. But there are some really great reflective learning tools that you can use that bring more of this evaluative thinking. And for example, doing after action reviews after the end of each thing you do, to stop and debrief how it went and what could be done differently, and to capture that, and sometimes to facilitate building of the theory of change as well. And then there's the journey documenter, or the historian, actually, almost. When people are working in social innovation, they get so busy, they don't write things down much. So this role is to just basically document what's happening, like a timeline of key moments, learning, capturing. I really like to use timelines and to capture key developmental moments. You can write little micro reports, like learning briefs, we call them, like 2 pages long, about a learning log. There's a nice technique called most significant learning, which is a story that you capture about what you're learning. And you can also do process evaluation reports or the full evaluation report, but it's a really important role. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to show you all 4. So I want you to type in to the chat function which one you think you need to learn more about, and maybe why. Well, I'll take the name, but if you want to say why, that's good. And feel free to press send straight away. when you're done, and we can read them as they come through. Let's see. Yeah, the 4 roles can be played by the same person, but if you have 2 people, you can decide to split it up. We do that sometimes when if we have 2 or 3 people. One person, I often get the critical friend role, and my team don't like to do that one. You need a little bit of sometimes it helps to have a bit of status to do that one. Yeah. Perhaps the translator could tell me what's being written in English. Yes. Critical friend is a little bit scary in a way because you got to speak up, but it's so helpful. You can only really do it if you're invited to do it. So that's something to think about for the rest of the team. If you are going to have that role, how do you invite that person into the role? Yeah, and then it's easier when you are invited. Yeah, and if you really need evaluation skills, some evaluation skills to do developmental evaluation. Although some of the tools are easier to learn than others, you'd have to invest some time in learning them if you haven't already done evaluation. The good thing is that all of it's not about a methodology, so you can use any evaluation tools, the box. It's more about how you apply it in the context. Excellent. Okay, let's go on to the case study. Let's see how we're going for time. So I'm gonna try and bring it all into reality with a case study at this point. So 1 minute, get rid of the. So the case study I'm going to do, and this is written up. So I encourage you, if you want to read more about this, to read the case study paper. It's on the resource that we've given you. So it's a 10-year project. It's called Our Town, and it aims at building the capabilities for people living in the towns to sort of transform their situation, particularly around mental health and well-being. And there are 6 towns currently involved. It's amazing because it's 10 years of funding. So it's a great example. And Taxi are the implementing partner, Clear Horizon, we are the developmental evaluators, but towns themselves do a lot of the evaluation work themselves. So it's not just external, it's a bit of both. So it's just to give you a sense, this is all about prevention and promotion of mental health. It's not to do with services. And it's community owned and led work, and it's got this long-term funding. It's an experiment in bringing developmental evaluation together with social innovation. Right from the very, very beginning, evaluation was involved, and it's all about prevention and promotion. That should give you enough context, probably. I'll just keep going. So I'm going to talk about the evaluation role. So we were the evaluators in this, and we said we would do it slow cooked. And it's a bit like what I said, we didn't develop a big plan. That was a really bad idea. I'd already learned that from previous experiences. So because this changed so much as you're learning, if you develop a big evaluation plan, you just have to keep redoing it. And that's a waste of time. So what we did was in the early stage, we really played that critical friend role, and we documented the learnings, and we did a process evaluation every 6 months, and after any significant thing like a retreat, we'd produce a report. And we also helped build the model, and I'll talk about that shortly. So the ingredients of our slow cooking were supporting to actually build the model, which was we helped co-develop a set of principles with the towns, and I'll show you them because you'll get the sense of it in a minute. And also developing this loose framework. That was our sort of starting phase. And then in the case of our town, they started off with no towns and they had to recruit them. So we really supported that process by providing ongoing feedback and checking in that our principles were being held, and co-developing, helping them set criteria to select the towns. And we actually helped. There was a whole year of capacity building for towns in social innovation. And so we assessed whether what they'd learned during that year as well. So we did collect some data. So it's an example of the first 2 years. So the starting phase. So let's get clear on this. This is a recap of what I showed you before. You need to clarify the scope, organize the contract, and work out the first moves, as well as doing the adaptive work. So here, the principles were a really key part for this project, and here they are. Excuse me. The first one was that we had to model mentally healthy practice. That was us, the evaluators, the designers, the funders, the people in the town. So this is a really important one, and we continue to struggle with it because while the towns are quite good, we're terrible at modeling mentally healthy practice. We all work too hard. So we've had to really think about that and held ourselves to account. And we constantly check that we're doing that. And we often get it wrong. So we have to bring ourselves back. So that's a really important principle. The second one is that it's community-led and owned. And that, again, is really a very big, important principle. If we get that wrong, everything falls apart. So we constantly bring ourselves back. And I'm often saying, now, where are we with this? You know, is this community led? Should we be doing this? What do you think? So this is really useful for me being the critical friend to remind people. Learning our way through change. This is an important principle that we are actually trying things and learning and then adapting. And we can test to see whether we're doing that. And then seeing and acting on the bigger picture. That's the systems thinking, because it's not just about the 6 towns. We're trying to change the way that mental health is considered in Australia. So bringing people back to that, have we thought about the bigger picture? So these principles were co-designed and they were hugely important and still are today. And that's what I use to evaluate again. So you asked about accountability. When you don't know, when something's not built, this is the secret. The principles are really, really important. And there's a whole approach, actually. I don't know if you've heard of principle-focused evaluation. So we're using that approach, also developed by Michael Quinn Patton. So that's a really key part of this. So when we started off, they were all we had. We didn't really know what we were doing yet. We use them to make decisions. We use them for our evaluation framework. We made judgments around them. And when we hadn't held them together, we worked out what we were going to do. And we continue to use them. They are probably the most important element of the work, of the design. Okay, see, I'm going middle phase. So the middle phase is where we start to do more than when we have more than the principles in place, when we have a theory of change formed, which we did together, and then we begin to sort of work in cycles of learning. And we're now working in 6 monthly cycles of like setting sort of progress markers and evaluating against them. But at the same time now, we do a lot of work building capability of towns to do this themselves. So that's really all about capability building, which is not in here actually. Yeah, so the sort of key things have been, we do as part of the 6 monthly cycle, we starts to look more like regular evaluation. We do surveys and interviews with key stakeholders. We collect data, and we use most significant change, which is a fantastic approach, by the way, that you might want to learn if you don't know it. It's a story-based approach, and it's very good at picking up emergence things that we don't know, we need to know. And we also run regular sense making. We've just had all towns together doing a sense making of looking at their progress and what they've achieved and what they've not. And so this starts to get into cycles, and it can get quite smooth. And then the final phase, I wanted to show you a little bit about the theory of change here, because this is a really important part at this stage, is to get your theory of change clear. And I would suggest the principles and the theory of change will be absolutely essential for you guys. They are sort of anchor methodologies. So how many of you done theory of change or program logic? Can you wave? I imagine it's quite lots of hands waving. Quite well known. I guess it's a little bit harder when you're doing this work. Some people haven't as well. When you're doing this work, because it changes a lot. The key thing I would say is build it loosely, keep changing it as you learn. Don't see it as something you just build and it's over and done with. I'll show you the theory of change for our town, hey? Here it is. It's a bit complicated, but you can have a look at it afterwards. But we co-designed this with towns, and it's the overarching theory of change for a whole 10 years initiative, but it helped us understand the phases. So I'm going to leave this as something for you to look at afterwards. You don't have time to look at it fully now, but you can see that it goes sideways. There's lots of different ways of doing this, but the top layer is about what the communities are doing, and then underneath it's a little bit moving down to what the support team do and what the network of towns does, because it operates at 3 levels. It's quite complicated, this initiative, but you may find your things are as well. And this type of theory of change allows us to unpack the complexity a bit. But you'll see it's important, because it's community led, that our goals set by community for community are realized, and we don't name them. So each town has its own theory of change, and they've developed it themselves. They're really good at it now. They love their theory of change. Actually, the towns love their theory of change. And so there is actually one for each town, and this is the initiative level one. But I wouldn't, although this is really important to do theory of change, I would not do it in the starting phase. I would let things evolve a bit and stick to principles. That can save you a lot of heartache. Believe me, I've done it the other way and spent ages doing the theory of change. So wait for things to land a little bit and then start to build it out. And remember, in this sort of work, they keep changing as you learn. We build them on sticky walls, big sticky walls, and with repositional glue. And we take them off and move things and build them physically. But these days, you can do it in a mirror board. Okay. The release phase of developmental evaluation. I think it's important to understand it can release into different things. Sometimes it ends, it's all over. Sometimes it goes into implementation and you move more into monitoring and evaluation work. Or it might go back to a new design cycle. For our town, I felt like the developmental phase, the main phase, led into capacity building for towns to do their own measurement and evaluation work. And that's ongoing. And the developmental evaluation was most intense in the first 2 years. But it still exists, but it's different because it's accompanied by towns doing their own work. But you do need reports. And so often the release phase can involve thinking about what you're going to report, whether it's produce, could be a refined theory of change. It could be an end of phase learning report. We often call them learning reports rather than evaluation reports, or you could have a process evaluation report. So it's quite important to think about what you need, but the outputs are often a bit different. Okay, I think I might. So were we going to have a break before this activity, Joni? Okay. Right. So we are 10 minutes behind, but then we're on track. Yeah. Okay. So what we'll do, so now that you know a little bit more about this, how this works, I'd be really like to think about how you might use it in your context, or which aspects of it might you use. And also, what do you think will be challenging? And maybe we can explore some of those challenges together. So this is what the breakout group is this time. Very much bring it to your own work. I'll let Joni organize the breakout groups.
So we will have 3 groups, and in each group we will have 4 to 5 people. And you can see the questions as we did in the previous activity in the mirror. And there you can see the questions. You can type your answers, bearing in mind what Jess just shared with us. We have 2 questions. What aspects of developmental evaluation would be beneficial in your context? Which ones could be challenging? What would be the main doubts or challenges in our context? And you have your templates, as we did in the previous activity. And we have 7 minutes so that you can discuss, and in case.
Yes, I'd love the first group to share back, and in particular, interested in the challenges that you may be having, and we could maybe explore some of the challenges together.
Okay, so we could see 2 clusters of challenges. The first one is related to the point of view that actors can share, that is also related with generating trust. That was one of the most interesting aspects for us. And when bringing it to our context, we could see how very often the first thing that comes up is difficulties with deadlines, with the length of the projects, because we have some projects that have been going on for 10 years maybe, and maybe it would be easier to apply in those shorter term or smaller projects. And from there we could start to work with this approach and keep it and apply it to the relationship with our agents in contexts that might be changing. And maybe it would be very interesting to use it also in relation with public administration, where we can see changes happening very often when there is a change in governments, etc. So we could see that this could be a very interesting spot in which we could be working with this vision, because it is subject to change, to often changes. From a more pragmatic point of view, when we were working with the principles regarding the data collection, we were having more questions. How can we work with a more quantitative aspect when we're talking about data that is more qualitative, and the opposite?
Okay, great discussion and sharing. Thank you. So I think it's really important to work on generating trust. And so there are, I mean, it's the same in social innovation, isn't it? Where if you want to do some social innovation work, you also need to build a trusting context to try and fail. And because failure powers the next step. So there has to be trust to talk about that. I think that's the sort of thing maybe you can pilot it to build what I say, build muscle for doing this sort of work. to start small, and I agree that it's probably not best to do it on long-term things that have been going for 10 years. Developmental evaluation does not suit every context. It's actually niche. It's for a small set of contexts where you're trying new things. So I wouldn't use it in the long-term projects. I'd use it in something new, something you're trying to change. I think it would be really interesting to use it in change management. I think that's what you're talking about, internal change management in public administration. I'm sure you could do cycles of trying things out and getting feedback. Be really interesting. But I've never seen it used like that. Yeah. In terms of methodology, and you can use any quantitative or qualitative data here. It does tend to be a little bit more qualitative in the really early stages. But as you move into the middle phase, there's no reason why you can't do surveys and quantitative track measures. Absolutely not. In the first phase, it tends to be a little bit more qualitative. One thing we do sometimes, though, is we develop a rubric. You know, a rubric is a scale, sort of a growth from just starting to mature. It's a strengths-based rubric, and it has a description in words against each level of maturity, and then we judge where we are at different points, and you can almost turn that into quantitative data. So that's as close as it gets often. Yeah, rubric-based approaches are really fantastic for this sort of work, to help you unpack firstly and co-design what it is you're trying to do, and then assess. Yeah, I've talked a lot. Let's go to, hopefully that is helpful. Let's go to the next group.
We have mentioned certain aspects that were very useful for us. The main focus, of course, and everything that has been introduced to us, but especially the roles were interesting for us. Seeing how different people were proposing different roles, that is very useful for our context. And on the one hand, we find that roles are very helpful to guarantee that the whole evaluation is being carried out, and that it is very useful to have people distributed in tasks. And also that could be a good way to organize teamwork too, because it is very interesting to work in groups and understanding that each person can have a different role in that group. And regarding the challenges, we were focusing especially on the resources. And resources means funding, means human resources, time. And one of the members of the group was saying that she had received certain food for thought because she lacks time for reflection when she is on her daily routines. And we also found that in policies, usually it is very easy to find funding for building roads and that kind of hardware, let's call it, but that it's more difficult to get funding for this kind of initiatives. And also, yeah, that we needed to develop these knowledge and abilities in our human resources. That's what we were talking about. I believe that was what we were talking about. If I forgot anything, if anybody wants to add something, anybody from the group.
Okay. Yeah, great things to raise. Yeah, roles, yeah, interesting that you found that useful. In terms of resourcing, it is worth thinking about. This stuff does take time and money. There is no doubt. But I also think that when you bring social innovation together with developmental evaluation, you can solve really tricky problems, really wicked problems. So maybe you reserve this for things that are critically important and really difficult. So we all know the world is not getting any easier to live in, yeah? And the challenges that we're facing in terms of equity, climate change, and disaster are increasing. So if I was a town hall, I'd be like going, where there's really big challenges, where there's really difficult and important things, let's make it work. Let's do everything we can to make this work. And that's where I would invest in this. I wouldn't be investing in this in everything because it is expensive. But what I'm seeing is that this is a very effective way of working when things get more complex. Hopefully that helps you. So I would choose where I would try to do this work carefully. And also this is when things get really hard, you put everything into it, don't you? Eventually. So I think there will be funding for this sort of thing when you're talking about disaster preparedness or dealing with really critical problems. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, and like you can do it internally and you can have one person playing that role, which is cheaper. It's just hard without the skill set. Let's go to the next group. Thank you. Okay, who wants to present?
Okay, I will start, and if anybody wants to add anything, they can do it too. So we were talking about how we are working in projects that require this kind of approach. And we have mentioned that there are certain things that have been already carried out in a more intuitive fashion, but how interesting it would be to work in an organized manner. And we were talking about the importance of coming to agreements in the work teams to share what are the steps that we will be carrying out. And we have also mentioned resources, time, money as challenges, and how working in a more organized manner would be helpful to make a better use of resources. And we have also talked about the need to have training in these subjects too. And maybe we could underline the importance of time management so that we can embed all of these points of views in our daily work. And if I forgot anything, if anybody in the group wants to mention it.
Okay, yes, time's come up again, hasn't it? Yeah, one more thing I would add about time is that when people start to do this work or think about doing it, they often talk about how much time it takes and they don't have the time to do it. But what you see is when people start to use it and they start to cycle in, use agile planning, so maybe work in 3 months and then at the end of the 3 months, look at what they've done, analyze it, look at the data, work out what needs to be done differently. They get a lot more effective. And you work more efficiently and effectively, and you actually achieve more, so that after you've done it for a while, nobody talks about how long it takes. They don't talk about that. They say, well, that's just how we work, you know, and because you are become more effective, it's better value for money. But it doesn't feel like that at the beginning. At the beginning, it feels like you have to do everything on top of what you're already doing. One little trick I have learned is that if you introduce something new, you agree to drop something. I don't know if that's helpful, but I always try and do that. If we're going to introduce something new, what are we going to drop? And sometimes that can help people manage time a little bit. But yeah, all I can say is that this stuff, when it works well, nobody talks about the time. They would normally want more of it. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next group. Right.
Okay, so in Oñati, we had 4 main ideas. For us, we had the feeling that it would be helpful to organize, to structure what we have been doing in an unsystematic way, and that would be very helpful. We have also mentioned that it brings tools for reflecting, and that would be very helpful to legitimate, for example, public policing. And in the challenges, we have also talked about times, because we can see the benefits, but we need to take the time to think, and how can we integrate that in the daily activities of administration? We could expect responses that are not very in favor of giving themselves some time to think. And another challenge would be that of the critical friend, which works very well in theory, but we could see how that would work in practice. And regarding time, we could understand the tool, we could understand how it works, but maybe we will need to work in the practice, but maybe that will come with the piloting. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if I forget anything.
Anybody else? No? Great. I think you've said similar things to the other groups, haven't you? And how to do it. And this the advantage of taking what maybe you do and making it more systematic and building it in. And you can try that in small ways. I encourage you to try it, small things, to get started in this work. One tool that I like to build, I say build muscle, build muscle in this sort of work, is a small tool called Most Significant Learning. And in this particular tool, which is written up, and it's in the resource pack, we can give it to you. It's very simple. And what we do is every sort of 3 months that we're doing a change process, we interview each other and we ask each other, what assumptions were we holding at the beginning that have not held true? And what happened, and why is that? Why did it happen? And that gets us used to understanding that things don't always go the way we expect, and that there's learning in that. And it helps us surface our assumptions. And I found that that's easier to talk about than failure. If you say what went wrong, people get worried. But if you say, hey, what assumptions did we hold that are not holding true, it's an easier way to begin. And then people practice doing that. And if you keep doing it in cycles every 3 months, you find it's a really, really fantastic method. And doesn't take a lot of time. Okay. So I think we've done all the groups now. And so where we're at, we're at 11 o'clock. So I don't know whether there's any final questions or what you want to do, Joni, with the time.
It's 11 o'clock. We said that we would be finishing at 11 o'clock. And I will write on the chat the link to the contents in the platform by Clear Horizon. It's some kind of, let's call it online academy, where you can see all the contents that Jess has explained. You can see lots of materials in case you want to delve deeper into this topic. Somebody mentioned that they had difficulties to get to the platform. We're here to help you in case anybody has any technical difficulties. We're here to help. And if there are no further questions, I don't see anybody raising their hands. Okay, so thank you everybody for your time. We will continue working on developmental evaluation in Oñati. We will be setting a pilot. We will help us to continue gaining knowledge, and we will be sharing our findings with you. We'll keep in touch, talking about experimentation, developmental evaluation, and talking about innovative spaces. Thank you once again, and see you next time.
Agur.